Okay, we're recording. Um, Today I want to talk about the French painter Paul Cezanne. Let me actually go to a um, title slide to start off with. Get that up and talk for a little while. All right. Now, as you know, watching the various videos in the series, if you have, I'm a humanities teacher, and one of the things that I'm doing is covering the history of painting. Part of what's really great about being a humanities teacher is that you get to keep on learning about all kinds of stuff. I'm not actually trained in art history, and I don't try to do anything too fancy in terms of including art history and history of painting in my humanities classes. What I do have in my humanities classes with the history of painting that I think is worthwhile is that we have a lot of shared sense of discovery as we look at some of this wonderful art. So, all right. Now, um, so well, it was the fall semester of 2020, in the middle of the pandemic. And so we're teaching long distance. And that's why I started making these videos, because we're teaching long distance and making these videos. So, I didn't know that making the videos would turn into a larger project, or that I would have use for the videos, or that these video courses would come together, or anything like that. It was just, getting by. I'd never made any videos like that before. So we're going along and we're doing history of painting, and that turns out to be pretty fun. And towards the end, I'm going to do French Impressionism, one of my favorite kinds of paintings. And and I thought, well, we're just going to do French Impressionism, and this will be the last time I'll do this. So I included Cezanne in the French Impressionist video because Cezanne was one of my favorite painters from the period, and I just didn't think I was really going to be able to revisit it. And then we went on, and I, ended up doing a post-impressionist video. And in the post-impressionist video, and studying along with that, it became clear enough that Cezanne really is not a French impressionist, strictly speaking. And it also became clear, which I already knew, that Cezanne was tremendously important in the history of art and the history of modern painting. So what I really want to do today is I want to do three things today. What I really want to do today is show you why Cezanne is so influential. What is it about Paul Cezanne that makes him one of the most important of the modernist painters? That's really the mission. And the second one is to also appreciate this beautiful, beautiful artist. I mean, the thing with the humanities classes is that we could have a birthday party and just look at these beautiful pictures. But I think you'll find that as we go a little bit deeper into these pictures and into what's going on in some of these canvases, some of these paintings, that you'll find that that study is worthwhile as well. So Cezanne, from Impressionism to modernism, I do want to make the case today in this video that Paul Cezanne is a tremendously influential artist, really on the whole course of 20th century art. I don't think that's too much to say. So I'm just going to get right to that stuff. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on biographical details or other things about Paul Cezanne. In fact, the biographical details that I'm going to give you on the slide we're looking at right now are the ones that I'm giving you because I think it helps understand this larger narrative that I'm going to give you. And that is that Cezanne was an outsider to the art scene in Paris. He mostly, in his mature painting, stayed in his native Provence, down in the south along the Mediterranean, near the Italian border there, Mediterranean landscape that he loved. He was from a wealthy family. Cezanne used to actually sort of put on airs of being rough and being kind of a working class person and wear workman's clothes and stuff like that, because he was self-conscious about the fact that really what he was this wealthy man whose banker father had finally acquiesced and saying, okay, well, you can go be a painter instead of a banker. And he really, unlike a lot of these other people, even some of the really kind of marginal and crazy ones, and remember a lot of these people in the late 19th, early 20th century doing Impressionist painting, post-Impressionist and modernist painting, are really voices in the wilderness. One of the things I'm going to point out to you during the course of this video today is, we think of these people as master painters today, but in their own time, there were those who appreciated them, but even the general art viewing and art critiquing public really didn't appreciate Paul Cezanne very much at all. But he didn't care that much. He had his own priorities, and this really made him a painter's painter, as I say in the last bullet point there. He was one who painters looked at what he was doing and said, well, now that's really interesting. That's really making me think, even though to someone who wasn't aware of what he was doing or what he was trying to do, sometimes his paintings seemed perhaps simply unremarkable. The card players, and the thing that jumped out at me about the card players, of course, is that he's not really particularly worried about the proportions of the bodies. Although Cezanne, well, his treatment of figures, I'm going to look at mostly at still lifes and landscapes actually here, but this is an example of a painting that the techniques, the way that I'm going to talk about the techniques, were things that were impressing painters, but you can see where an ordinary viewer who was used to 19th century romantic painting, for example, might look at that and say, well, gosh, what is that? Now, he had in 1904 a special show where he showed 3 paintings. These were mostly paintings from the 1880s, 1890s, all paintings from the 1880s, 1890s. He showed 3 paintings. I'm going to show you all 3 of the paintings that he showed here on these next 3 slides, juxtaposed with some of the critical remarks that were published in the papers about this show. Again, remember, this is 1904, so this gives you some idea of the general attitude towards modernist painters at the time. Here's a portrait. He chooses to daub paint on a canvas and spread it around with a comb or a toothbrush. This process produces landscapes, marine, still lifes, portraits, if he's lucky. The procedure somewhat recalls the designs that school children make by squeezing the heads of flies between the folds of a sheet of paper. One of the things. And again, these 3 paintings, this one and the other 2 on the other 2 slides, are the paintings that these critics are looking at. That was one. This is the second one. Cezanne is nothing but a lamentable failure. Perhaps he has ideas, but he's incapable of expressing them. He seems not to know even the first principle of his craft. 2 things in that are both very ironic, that he has the ideas, but he's incapable of expressing them, and he doesn't know the first principles of craft, because what we're going to see is that what's really influential about Cezanne, and the reason that painters always loved Cezanne's paintings, even though he always had, he had a certain obscurity, is because he's a master craftsman. And I'm going to show you what that means. The Harlequin, of course, that we associate with Picasso. The impression given by all these clumsily daubed portraits is truly painful. They bear witness to a fatal impotence. This is the third of those 3 paintings. So the point is that not only ordinary viewers in the late 19th, early 20th century, but also critics found they didn't pick up on Cezanne's greatness. They didn't necessarily see Cezanne's greatness, and in fact, Cezanne was something of a bafflement to a lot of people. Nonetheless, he was a great idol to many painters. In 1899, Matisse, who didn't have a lot of money, who didn't collect paintings, had to have Cezanne's three bathers. He borrowed money to buy it. It took him a number of years to pay off the debt. He kept the painting with him all his life. Decades later, he said, it supported me morally during the critical moments of my artistic adventure. And he said other things about this painting as well. So the Cezanne piece, a talisman for Matisse. Picasso said Cezanne was the mother hovering over us all. And you don't have to read very much. You don't have to dig in very deep to be informed that both Picasso and Matisse said Cezanne was the father of us all. That's the kind of thing that's going to get remembered. My goal here for the next few minutes is to show you exactly why Matisse and Picasso thought as highly of Cezanne as they did. And as I say, sort of dig into that a little bit so that we have a little bit clearer understanding of his influence. Van Gogh spent time in Provence. He met Cezanne, and Van Gogh, not Cezanne didn't invite him to, but Van Gogh said, "May I please, sir?" And Van Gogh went over to where Cezanne was with a whole bunch of his paintings, representative paintings of landscapes and portraits and things, because Van Gogh wanted Cezanne to see, and Van Gogh showed Cezanne his paintings. Um, Cezanne was a little bit alarmed by Van Gogh. I mean, he thought Van Gogh was a little bit overeager. And I mean, I don't know what Van Gogh was like in person, but we do know that Van Gogh was a little bit naughty. Apparently, Cezanne told Van Gogh that he thought that they were the work of a mentally disturbed person. I don't know if that's actually true. But the point here is not how Cezanne reacted to Van Gogh. The point here is that Van Gogh held Cezanne in such high esteem that that it was Van Gogh who put that situation together when he wanted Cezanne to see his paintings. And of course, another thing that we hear about when we read about it, I want to show you today why this is so, how this is so. Cezanne has ideas about fundamental geometrical forms as underlying visual representation. And those ideas are a touch spring and an inspiration to Pablo Picasso and Georges Braque sitting around in Paris in the early 20th century and conceptualizing what became Cubism. So I'm going to show you that today. This is the three bathers that Matisse bought. He painted, Cezanne painted around 1880, Matisse bought it about 20 years later. This kind of handling of brushstrokes where you can see the machinery of the application and yet at the same time you've got the representation is, you know, a wonderful aspect of modern art, but it's all there in Cezanne. And when the story is that when Picasso saw the bathers in 1906, he saw it as really, if anything, he saw it as a challenge. He said, gosh, that challenges me. I have to rise to the challenge of that painting. That's the legend. And it was so he showed the bathers, Cezanne did in 1906, and it was the next year, 1907, that Picasso showed Los Demoiselles d'Avignon, which is really his breakthrough painting, the painting that really put Picasso on the map. This kind of heavy way with figures, which I think is very Mediterranean somehow. So here's the meat of the story, and then we can have some fun looking at some beautiful Cezanne paintings, but let's do a little bit of work here and understand why it is that Cezanne is as influential a painter as he is. A couple of things. Number one, painting basic shapes. He said this to another painter, treat nature in terms of the cylinder, the sphere, and the cone. In nature, there are basic geometrical shapes. And getting those shapes out is part of representation. Remember, we're talking here about a post-impressionist. So we're talking about strategies to get a certain element of subjective experience onto the canvas. Building form with color. Again, you see, I mentioned that the card player is kind of a clunky looking, sort of surprising painting if you're not an aficionado. If you're just an ordinary person looking at the painting, you think, gosh, the guy's head's too small, is what you think. But painters looking at Cezanne from very early on, what they admired most about him was this, that he built up his images from fundamental color, which is almost kind of the reverse of the way, if you look at, say, YouTube painting videos like I do all the time, what they'll tell you is block it out and then work from the blocks down into the details. And Cezanne kind of paints from the inside out because he thinks the color and the tone is really what constitutes the surface. Remember, a painting's an illusion. A painting is a physical object, is paint on a flat surface. And Cezanne is the breaking free of that we associate with modernism and with modern painting. Shadow is a color as light is. Light and shadow are only the relation of two tones. You know, another thing about that is, another thing you'll notice a lot of working painters do is they start off with black. I mean, you know, you really have a good black and you put a lot of black, and say you're painting flora, you're painting plants, you put it, you put a black coat on, and then that makes the plants pop out from the black. And Cezanne, again, he doesn't do things that way. He starts, again, sort of somehow inside the object that he's going to represent and works out from the color. The flattening of perspective is, when I show it to you, if you don't know what that means now, you'll instantly recognize what it means when I show it to you. And that's another thing, I mean, you have the French Impressionists. They're interested in conveying and representing the quality of subjective experience, particularly visual experience. That's a beautiful thing about them and makes for the wonderful, wonderful paintings that they make. But a lot of other things that we associate with modern painting, the Impressionists didn't really do. I mean, Cezanne, we call him a post-impressionist, by the way. Another reason I did Cezanne when I did my Impressionist video is he lives at the same time. We call Cezanne a post-impressionist. We don't call him a post-impressionist the way we call Matisse and Picasso and Juan Miro post-impressionist, because as he lived later, Cezanne is practically a contemporary of the Impressionists, and that's important. So I'll show you this flattening perspective. And finally, the fine-grained impasto. What does that mean? What does he say there? He says, pure drawing is an abstraction. Drawing and color are not distinct. Everything in nature is connected. Impasto is piling up the paint on the surface of the canvas. We associate impasto probably in this period mostly with Vincent van Gogh, who very extravagantly piles up the paint on his canvas. So you actually can get like a 1/4 inch high sort of dune or ridge of paint across a Van Gogh canvas. Cezanne is also using the impasto technique, but in a much subtler way, because Cezanne is piling or layering on the paint onto the surface of the canvas. He is doing impasto, but what he is doing is working with very fine brushes and working again and again and again to slowly develop both to slowly develop essentially, as he says, the color, but in doing so to develop also the essential contours of the surface, which he expresses in light and shade, which he doesn't do by just using a bunch of black. He gets the colors to do it. So you start to see why someone who knew what working with oil paint was like, seeing a Cezanne canvas might think, gosh, look at that. Even though someone else who wasn't really aware of technical issues about oil painting might look at a Cezanne canvas and go, well, I could do that. So let's go through them and look at some examples. Painting from basic shapes. And of course, this is the thing that, this is the reason why we say that Cezanne is a major source and influence on Cubism. And this is a major reason why Picasso always says such definitively wonderful things about Cezanne, which he always does. Treat nature in terms of the cylinder, the sphere, and the cone. Interestingly, there are all these geometrical shapes in nature, as of course Cezanne can see with his own eyes. So, the representation it's always going to have two sides to it. The brilliance of Impressionism, post-impression, general modernist painting is those two sides. It's one thing to have the innovations. It's another thing to also have the form of the painting. So second bullet point, Cezanne wanted not only to depict the quality of subjective experience as the Impressionists did, he also developed a kind of cognitive primitivism. What do I mean by that? There are underlying shapes. Look at the shapes. Is there a sphere? Is there a cone? What is there? And get to that shape and start with that shape. And then you're getting, again, another kind of primitivism, not just the kind of elemental sense that the Impressionists are getting when they show you what it's like to see. But also it's thinking about things in a really sort of automatic sort of way. Picasso and Georges Braque were inspired by Einstein's new theory of relativity to try to break up the perceived surfaces into smaller facets and thus transcend singular unified perspective, that third bullet point there. And they did that thinking about Einstein's theory of relativity, thinking also about the new atomic physics in general, and they were inspired by that, and that's a big part of Cubism. But really, it was Cezanne's work with underlying geometrical forms, I think, that really was the main artistic or representational inspiration for Cubism. And I think it's fairly easy to see that. Here's a Cezanne painting from the middle of the 1890s. Another thing to notice is Cezanne's palette, which is very nice. The palette, of course, is the combinations of colors that an artist typically uses. But notice that what he's looking at is shapes. Of course, rock formations are perfect for this kind of technique that he has of looking for underlying geometries. But look at these paintings. Again, this is 1895. Here we have a little bit over 10 years later. Georges Braque, Picasso. Again, notice the palette. Notice the use of tones and color, but also just notice building something up from elemental shapes. And who and where does that come from? Well, Picasso and Braque will tell you where it comes from. It comes from Cezanne. Building form with color and fine-grained impasto, because after all, these are very closely related things. So I'll just do them in one slide here. First, shadow is a color as light is, but less brilliant. Light and shadow are only the relation between two tones. Pure drawing is an abstraction. Pure drawing is an abstraction. In other words, there is no such thing as pure drawing, he thinks. Drawing and color are not distinct. Everything in nature is connected. There's that synesthesia, again, that we always notice when we're looking at the history of painting. You can draw, you can draw pencil and charcoal on paper, and it's just a black and white drawing, but that doesn't mean, that doesn't imply color. And this also, I'm going to show you a couple of really abstract modernist painters who I think are also coming out of Cezanne in this sense. Typically, again, look at your basic YouTube painting video. A painter might block off the major areas and shapes in their subject, and then they're going to work down. They're going to block it off, and then they're going to work it down to the details. You're going to come back to it in layers. Cezanne worked the other way around. I mean, to him, the colors were the basic constituents. To him, all you were doing was combining and juxtaposing colors. That's what sort of painting was, because he had a vision of the surface, again, with the surface of what? The surface of your visual field? No, the surface of your painting as color, as something that's composed essentially of color. And the last bullet point there, fine-grained, again, the application of multiple brush strokes to build up texture. Very much the opposite of the sort of stereotype of the kind of quickly working inspirational artist. Cezanne was a craftsman, a craftsperson. He applied himself and went over these objects again and again until they had the kind of depth and texture that he thought they should have. Here's Van Gogh. Now, Van Gogh, you see the thick impasto, which I love. As I say there, you can see that he's piling up. He actually is also using a knife. Those details, those are reflections, I guess, are part of the pattern. In the foreground, in front of the quinces, he's using a little palette knife. It's like a little butter knife kind of thing, and he's just putting the paint right on the canvas. You can see that in the background as well. So that's that thick impasto that you know from Van Gogh paintings like Starry Night and the Haystacks and all that, which is wonderful stuff. I love it. It's great to see Van Gogh paintings in person. But compare that to Cezanne's much finer impasto. And particularly, he loved to do these still lifes with fruit, and he worked really, really hard on these fruits, peaches, apples, quinces. he just really would work extremely. No, notice you can see the background, that blue background. You can see how much he's worked on it. He's gone over it a number of times, but then he's gone over many dozens of times of the objects. They have a weighty kind of quality. The one thing that distinguishes Cezanne, I think, from Impressionist painters and a lot of other painters of the period in his still lifes is this kind of sense of weight and solidity that Cezanne manages to convey. And I think that is a function of the application that goes into the objects. It's almost, and both Van Gogh and Cezanne have this quality, it's almost kind of a sculptural quality, you know, to build things up like that. Flattening perspective is one of the things that people notice when they look at a lot of modern paintings. Really, Cezanne uses inverse perspective, sometimes called Byzantine perspective. What this is you have the background, which is generally a plane. It might be wallpaper, it might just be a color. And the front plane is the fourth wall, if you will, the visual plane at the front of the canvas. And then you put your objects between the back and the front. An example of that are those icons like Eastern Orthodox Russian religious icons, where you've just sort of got the saint in the foreground, and or even brought forward as a sculpture. That's what is going on there. That's the technique that the artist is using to draw your attention, make sure that you're looking at the subject, the actual subject of the painting. And the Impressionists don't do that. Actually, when you look at Monet, one of the things that really blows my mind about Monet is that he has these, you know, he's putting the painting on the canvas. You can see all of his brushstrokes, but he has a wonderful classical perspective in a lot of his paintings that is technically very hard. He makes everything look so easy. And when you look at Van Gogh or Matisse or a lot of other people, especially if you see them for the first time, and you get this treatment of perspective, it can be one of the most startling things. I mean, I think I associated Matisse with that kind of flat perspective when I was, you know, a student at the beginning, before I really understood anything else about Matisse at all. So with Cezanne there, last bullet point, you get it that he's taking a step beyond the Impressionists. The Impressionists who are saying, okay, I'm not trying to represent the scene. I mean, I'm representing the scene, but I'm representing the qualitative experience of the scene. I'm representing the scene as a qualitative visual scene. But with Cezanne, you know, you get to this post-representational 20th century art, which is entirely abstract often. And you think, well, gosh, that's a complete break with, after all, the representational painting of the past. But there's got to be a bridge, and one of the, you know, many bridges here in the historical area is Cezanne. And why? Because he's not just thinking about that kind of treatment of subjective sensory experience. He's going beyond that. He's thinking, we've seen a couple things. He's thinking about the way that we conceive of geometrical shapes underneath the surfaces of things and projecting that into his paintings. And he's dispensing with traditional perspective altogether, which is easier said than done. How can you make an interesting painting if you do? And I want to show you then in the next couple of paintings how tremendously influential Cezanne was with this. And something that might not occur to us if we're looking at these paintings and thinking and not making a connection between these paintings to some of the more abstract work that follows. Byzantine or perspective. Van Gogh actually uses something called single point perspective. And so again, see how the objects are flat. They're flat like in a slide, like if you're making a microscope slide to look at something and it's between two pieces of glass, right? I mean, that's sort of the compositional notion. And that indeed has this effect, again, of causing these objects to kind of jump out at us and giving these objects a certain kind of presence. Here's Matisse. Here's Picasso. Here's Van Gogh, again, single point perspective. And now look at Juan Miro, a contemporary of these people. And this too, right, is reverse perspective. This too is using that planar effect. And here's Kandinsky, the Russian modernist who's full on working on the synesthetic meanings of different shapes and colors, completely not tied to a context. And again, there you see it, the reverse perspective or Byzantine perspective of Cezanne, which is another step beyond classical traditional representation, another step beyond the Impressionists. Now, I saved for the last what I think is one of the very best parts of Cezanne, which is Cezanne, the landscape painter. Cezanne was very devoted to what we call en plein air painting, painting outside. His mentor was Pissarro. He and Pissarro spent a long time sort of tripping around together, painting outside. There were various innovations here. One of them actually was putting the oil paints in tubes, which might sound kind of quotidian, but this actually made it a lot easier for painters to made them mobile. You could take your tubes of paint just about anywhere. They were mass-produced tubes of paint. Remember, it wasn't too long before this that painters had to make their own paint or buy their paint from the person who made the paint. And like many painters, Cezanne starts by noticing the landscape, a beautiful landscape, and thinking, gosh, I want to paint that. And so it's solving problems as a landscape painter. And I think if you look at sort of just the practice biography of a lot of painters, you'll find that this is true. They start to solve problems and learn things. So a lot of the technical innovations of Cezanne that we've been talking about up till now are actually clearly things that he worked out while he was trying to paint nature. A painter sitting by a stream needs only move 2 inches to either side to open up new worlds. Outside in nature, that was where the stuff was to be painted. And then he paints. I think he's staying at his sister's house. I should have checked that out before he started recording today. And he does a whole bunch of studies of this mountain, Mount Saint Victor, Saint Victoire. And again, you can see him coming out into his understanding of deploying basic shapes in order to convey, for example, the three-dimensionality of a surface. So again, let's not be too serious. I think we've done most of the serious work that we need. I want to show you, not much more. But I do want to now stop and smell the roses and look at some of these wonderful, wonderful canvases that Cezanne makes in many years of painting outside, trooping around with his easel like the stereotypical painter of yore, or of now, and painting Provence, this rural French countryside. And so one thing is that this mountain, Mount Saint Victor, fascinates him. He paints, I don't know, I'm sure that you could find without too much trouble, again, something I could have looked up, how many paintings of this mountain Cezanne did, or at least how many that we know of. It's a lot. And so here, the thing is, you look at the sort of way he's getting the dimensionality out of it by using those simple shapes. And he's just, like I think, again, true of many painters, he paints the subject again and again, finally to this wonderful masterpiece of the mountain. And look at the way that he gets the gravity and the sort of unfolding and rolling of the mountain out, the way the mountain's kind of, the dimensionality of the mountain. And I want to show you, so then just to stop today, and I guess I might, just to stop today, and I guess I might have to stand up to do this a little bit. But I'm an amateur painter, and I mean amateur, right? But then I'm trying to paint the mountains off the balcony. I'm trying to paint the mountains of Puerto Rico, right? I'm down here trying to paint the mountains of Puerto Rico. Let me see if I can show you this. Oh, I guess I better stop the share. Stop the share. So I'm trying to paint mountains. Just coming up, and you can see my mountains here are pretty ditzy mountains because the ridge of the mountain is just going all the way straight down, right? So that's no way to do a mountain. So I'm looking at that. I'm going, boy, are you dumb, man? Look at that mountain. It's just it goes straight down. That's silly. And so I'm looking around and I'm thinking, and I see these Cezanne, this mountain, and I see Cezanne saying, okay, well, cool, Yeah, I just got this little sketch pad next to the computer. I'm like, look at that. And yeah, you know, here's a later one, and yeah, starting to get it. Another thing I'll show you here is you notice how I've got those heavy black outlines around those hills um, on the side, kind of growing on me, but I sort of thought it was a mistake that ruined the painting when I did it. I put those big black outlines on those hills there because I was looking at Cezanne's still lifes, and I was thinking about his fine impasta technique. And the thing is, since he puts so many brush strokes on those paintings of the fruit, there's a lot of circles. They're not just outlined. I mean, they're sort of outlined all the way to the bottom. So I thought, oh, that's cool. So trying to be, cool like Cezanne, I put those outlines on, which of course it just looks terrible. Oh, I don't know. It's kind of growing on me. It doesn't look that bad. Anyway, just to finish then, though, but this is, a real point. Here we are in humanities class. And you know me, I'm just this guy. I just like to learn and I like to share things with you. I'm not cynical. I don't do stuff because we're supposed to do it. I only do stuff because I like it. And I'm thinking, okay, well, why don't I try and make some paintings? So I'm trying to make some paintings. And it's not about some goal. Just a couple real quick points. There's so many different things you could say. But one thing is, don't compartmentalize like great historical painters like Paul Cezanne in one compartment and yourself in another. Even if you can't draw anything, I can't draw anything. Even if you've never done anything like that in your life, so what? It's fun. Looking at the paintings is fun. Knowing about the paintings is fun. But you can also draw and you can also paint, and that's also another way to learn a lot of things. So, we're here at the State University, the STEM campus of State University. A lot of you, my students, are engineering students, which I love. I love having engineering students because they have so much discipline and they're really good students. Sorry, philosophy students. But what I want you to see is, you're taking my humanities class as an elective. Yeah, okay. And we should have some fun with it. And I hope when you're taking my class that you do have some fun. Among other things, we're looking at these nice paintings at painters like Paul Cezanne. But also get it that, this stuff is all here for you to enjoy. I think that's important about the literature that I talk about in these videos as well. It's all there for you to enjoy. You can partake of that, and I think too many people don't really realize that. They think that art and literature and things like that are things that are sort of up on some fancy level, or that it would be pretentious of them, or who are you? Who am I to compare myself to Paul Cezanne? Well, I know exactly who I am. Just me, Mr. Nobody. But, I also have some sense of the personality of this man, and he certainly would have welcomed me to enjoy his painting in that level too, to kind of dig into it. And I try and write some poetry, try and make a painting, because that's really what the humanities is all about. But I'll stop with that now. Anyway, a real fun experience with Paul Cezanne for me, and and think about the method of learning and the method of engaging, and that will also help you a lot. Because if you're having fun, then you'll do more and you'll get farther. That's something that my dad used to tell me. If you like it and you're enjoying the work, you'll get a lot farther and you'll do a lot more. Okay, thanks. And I shall see you soon. Lots of really cool links here. Again, I'm going to do links here mostly to these technical issues about Cezanne. That's what I would like to see you knowing about. Bye-bye.